Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Mind Blown Zone, episode 3. This is Matt. I'm here with Brad. How are you, Brad?
Never better yourself.
Same answer. I think you've, determined the greatest answer of all time. Never better. So I just adopt it. Just sounds great.
Fantastic.
So in this episode, this is called the legal overlay history. This is stuff about law. This is stuff about the legal system. This is going to be mostly Brad. He's going to take us through a big history of law and the legal system. And he's going to basically tell me what happened, what has happened, and I will be kind of the person making sure that everything is explained in a way that is complete for listeners, so that every question is kind of answered along the way and full understanding is conveyed. Okay, Brad, take it away.
Fantastic. Yeah, no, this is so for the listeners, this is, think of this is kind of Matt and I over the last few months talking about various different subjects, and kind of, what caused us to be interested in the podcast was that I would explain something to him, and he had really insightful, good questions about it. Well, this wasn't clear, or that wasn't clear. And, I think it was, first dawned on Matt. He's like, well, it'd be fun to do a podcast with some of these conversations. When we're done with a conversation, that would have been interesting for other people to listen to. So that was one of the reasons we thought about doing this. And hopefully we'll get a little bit of that today. This is mostly stuff that I have researched for the last couple of years, 3, 4, 5 years. And, it's some eye-opening material. And I wanted to present this with all of the history and the key highlight inflection points, if you will, on how these things have happened. Because when I first learned all of this legal, lawful gibberish back and forth, I would learn only the latest thing. Like, here's what they did, the straw man, for example. Everybody talks about that. In my mind, I thought, well, how did this come about? Like, how did they get away with this? How did this happen? And, it wasn't until months or years later that I would learn the real full history of how things got to where they were. So hopefully we'll be able to pull that off here today. I won't ramble too much, and Matt, interrupt me at any time if what I'm explaining here isn't making sense.
Happy to.
As I know you will. So, first off, and I also wanted to get this out just as a precursor here, is that this is the kind of material that most presenters and researchers present as something bad and wrong and evil, and we have to overthrow. And this is, you can come away from listening to this feeling depressed or helpless, powerless to fix things. And that's not what I'm going to convey here today. I mean, it's certainly, an uphill battle, but once you understand what's happening, you realize that there's an opportunity to correct things for yourself. You can't correct them for everybody, but you can correct them for yourself, from your family, friends, etc., that are interested. But it does require some learning and understanding. Someone can't just come and fix it for you. And that's really the whole point of this, is that this legal system that we're under today, that I'll be explaining throughout, is basically taking away self-governorship from each of us, from self-responsibility of our affairs in the world. So it's kind of taken the burden off of the people, because the assumption from, those that are running the system is we're not smart enough to do this. We're not wise enough to be able to govern ourselves. So they're going to do it for us. That's kind of the idea. So when you get done hearing this, just think, do I want to step out of this system and become responsible for self-governing my life, my affairs, my property? Or am I comfortable with leaving things as they are? Everything's okay for me right now. That's the real inflection point. And it's a certainty that some percentage of the population would rather leave things as they are. They're counting on other people taking care of their affairs, taking care of their finances, and so on and so forth. And that's just going to be the way it is for those other people. So hopefully that makes sense, Matt.
Yeah, I'm with you.
All right. So I'm calling this an opportunity, and it's, by the way, it's also a nice step in the direction of self-discovery, right? Is that feeling of being in total control of your life and your affairs, something that we don't have presently. Most of us, there are certain restrictions and limitations placed upon us by these legal governmental dictates. And when you reach the end of this process and perfect it, you can effectively get around almost all of those. So that's what's interesting. We're not going to cover that today, but that'll be a future broadcast. So I'm going to get started and just mention, I remember smiling and laughing the first time I saw this word law, L-A-W, and looking for the origins of it, and you won't, very hard to find out there, but in effect, those are the three jurisdictions, if you will, the three sections of law that have been operating since time immemorial. So the L stands for land, and that's the law of the land, and this is what people often refer to as the common law. And I wanted to explain this really quickly, because then some people go out looking for books or explanations, and there are books and explanations, but the common law means what's common to the culture, the people that you're living with and around. So it's not written down. It's the customs, the mores, the traditions of the people that you live around. That's all it is. And
we kind of take that word for granted, right? Common. Oh, it's common.
Absolutely. So the example I always give people is, like, say you lived in Papua New Guinea or something, and you wanted to, you don't have showers and things, but you go down to the river to take a bath, and you take off all your clothes, and so you're naked by the river, and you take your bath, and every now and again people see you naked. It's no big deal to them, but you'd get thrown in jail, right, for doing this in America, right? There's a guy swimming naked down at the river. So it's common for us not to be allowed to swim naked in rivers, but it's common for the Umfufu tribe to be able to swim naked to wash themselves by the river. So that is a common law. People in Middle Eastern countries where the women have to wear the hijab or whatever on their face when they're out in public, right? That's the common law for them. And they get into all sorts of trouble if they don't cover up their face. Totally different here in America, right?
So I see you've written that common law is different from natural law. So can I clarify something with you?
Sure.
I've got on Webster here, Webster's Dictionary, 1828. Common law, in Great Britain and the United States, the unwritten law, the law that receives its binding force from immemorial usage and universal reception, in distinction from the written or statute law, and it goes on more. So,
yeah.
Can you clarify that then?
Well, so the statutory law is the M, or the W, the water part, maritime water. Just to be clear on that, the natural law is what governs this realm, this universe, right? So is this what you were asking? Like, you want more explanation of natural law?
I guess what my confusion there was, like, what Webster says, like, the receives its binding force from immemorial usage, universal reception. That kind of I don't know. That kind of sounds like a description of natural law, like since time immemorial. Or
it does.
Maybe he's trying to say that it's just common law, and it means that it's been accepted as normal for just a very long time. Do you reckon maybe he's more saying that?
Maybe. That's a good lesson here right off the bat, is don't ever use everyday average dictionaries to understand legal and lawful stuff. They're almost always way off. You got to look at law dictionaries to learn.
Okay.
If you want to learn some of these words, and there are, of course, multiple definitions and explanation. I mean, it's a winding part of what the legal system is you can unwind, you can get out of anything inside the legal system with just like word interpretation and usage. But here's what I say the distinction is between natural law, universal law, God's law, whatever you want to call it. So this idea of moving around or traveling, right? The natural law suggests that you can go wherever you want at any time. There's nothing stopping you from getting on a boat and sailing across an ocean and going to another country, right? Or walking over a fake border between countries, right? The natural law is you can move between these different states or nations, right? Nothing's stopping you. That's natural. But now the
Mhm.
common law of country X and country Y suggests that only people that, are citizens of their country can walk across this border, or else you have to have paperwork and sign something and blah, 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 blah. So that is breaking the natural law to set up these unnatural geographic borders.
Mhm.
Follow?
So it seems like the common law is this is how we do it here,
That's
and
right.
the natural law is something that that is just like objectively coming out of reality that everyone could come to the conclusion of if they thought about it philosophically. Is that right?
Yeah. It's the same idea with like free speech. You're allowed to say whatever you want to say according to the natural law,
Mhm.
right? You can say whatever you want to say. Nothing's stopping you from saying whatever you want to say. But in certain countries, certain places, right, their man's law, legal system, statutory law has come in and said, no, you aren't allowed to say these things in our country, in our state, whatever. So that is a breaking of the natural law. And there's consequences to breaking the natural law, by the way. Effectively,
So what is the statutory law? Like I always get confused on that. What is that exactly?
so that this comes from my next bullet here. We'll get into that, but that the statute, it's a nice word. Most people, when they see that word, what do they really see? They see statue, right?
Yeah,
So
some people even say statute law.
right, it is the law. It is the law of the fictional, in effect, and I'll hopefully get into that a little bit more here today. But it is the legal system governing unreal things. That's what statutory law is.
How specifically are they creating statutes in the United States right now?
What do you mean? How specifically? That's all they create.
Well, but who creates it? Like, does a judge create it, or does the legislature, or
It's
what?
it's the legislature. Yes, right.
Is that when they put in a bill and then
Yep,
the people around the parliament or whatever you call it go, yes, we sign this into law. It's a statute. It's a law, right?
that's right. That's exactly
Okay, so
right.
that's statutory law. Okay.
And while we're on this, we might as well cover what those are, what they really are. And this is one of the. Hopefully, we'll get through some of this explanation today. But really, what those are policies, corporate
Hmm.
policies. I'll
Right.
explain what a
Corporate policies.
corporation is later. Or some people say corporate bylaws. So the perfect example
Hmm.
is, say you work for McDonald's, right? If you sign up to become an employee for McDonald's, they've got, the employee handbook, and it's got all their policies on what they expect of a McDonald's employee to follow. You got to wear the, maroon pants and the yellow shirt or whatever, right? You got to wear your name badge. Well, these are all corporate policies for McDonald's.
And what does this bylaw imply? Is that like buy as in secondary or something, or what is buy?
BY-law. It's a bylaw. So that's just another way to distinguish it from the actual law, right?
Okay.
It's the same thing as a policy. They're one and the
Right.
same. I prefer policy just because I don't like, it just gets confusing when you say law, law, law. Everybody gets confused by it. But it's like the word law has been attached to all these different ideas. That it's kind of a way of hiding what's really going on, like a statutory law, a by
Right. So we
law.
have these policies and we're running around arguing about whether things are lawful or not when we're often talking about just whether the controllers have made it a statutory policy or something. And it's got nothing to do with law at all.
It has nothing to do with law at all. It's what's happened, and I'll try to get into this in this explanation today, is they tricked us into being employees or dependents of the corporation known as the United States of America, Inc.
Mm-hmm.
That's it. That's the trick. And when you are tricked into doing that, then you have to follow the corporate bylaws, which are the statutes.
Right.
Make sense?
So if you consider yourself an employee of the corporation,
You don't,
then
though. You don't. You don't consider yourself that. You think you're a U.S. citizen or an Australian citizen.
right. Or if you don't know that you're acting as if you were an employee or something.
It's not
Maybe
even
a better
that.
way to put it.
It's not even
Okay.
no. It's not even that. It's that they are treating you like an
Oh, they're
employee or a
treating
dependent.
you like that. Okay.
Right. Right. You have no idea. That's the whole.
Okay.
That's the whole trick.
Right.
And so once you learn it, as hopefully we'll get a little bit into today's or the next week's broadcast, once you learn it, then you go, this is what they're doing, right? And all of
Mm-hmm.
this started to really get dug into, of course, with the COVID stuff, and they were, having to wear a mask everywhere, and all the businesses closing. For me, it was like, how are they doing this to us, right? Didn't
Yeah,
make
right.
sense. If I want to keep my
They
business
they just
open,
suddenly said there's a law. Your law, you're not allowed outside.
it was
Like,
a mandate.
okay,
It was a mandate, and everybody assumed it was a law, which
right,
is which is what they've been doing this whole time. They're just assuming that when the legislature creates a statute that it applies to me. Just assumed it.
right.
And we'll dive into that a little bit deeper, but that's the trick.
Did you want to
So
cover this other one, canon law, ecclesiastical?
real quick, I mean, I'm just going to breeze through these. So, ecclesiastical is the highest law. It's the air, and it's the A in LAW. And this is what drives really everything. Canon law. So it's from the Vatican. So it's at the top of the heap, even though the letters don't signify what comes first, second, and third. It really is the highest law. And it's spiritual law, if you will. So they're obviously trying to say this is what the universal natural law is, but of course that gets changed around and tricks us, and on and on and on. Not going to spend any time on that. The last one is W, or water, and this is the whole, for people who have heard a little bit about this before, this is maritime or admiralty is what they call this jurisdiction, and it's an important thing. It's always been an important thing, and I'll explain that here in a little bit. But that's a different jurisdiction. Basically, it's for international trade. It's for two countries, two separate nations, to be able to interact with each other in commerce. And that's the importance of the water or maritime jurisdiction. Make sense?
Okay. And I understand that this one's going to play quite a big role in
Yep.
what you're going to explain, right?
Yep.
Okay, I'll just leave that open for now.
So those are the three jurisdictions, and I'll talk about that word, jurisdiction. It's an important word. So here's where I wanted to start, is with this Emperor Justinian the First. And this is after the fall of Rome, Nero fiddling and so forth. So you might consider Emperor Justinian, even though a lot of this is bunk and the way they do this, but he's the emperor of the Eastern Roman Empire right after the main thing falls apart.
So this guy was in like Byzantine, is that right?
That's exactly right. The Byzantine Empire is what we call it today. But he had taken all the statutes and mandates and decrees and ordinances that all the different emperors and all the different people who ran the outposts, and he brought it all together. He had a team, and he codified it. Code's a nice word, right? Think about all the codes that we're under, right? That's what basically the legislative work, it's all codified. And if you think about that word code, it's something that only select few people can understand, right? It's a code.
Right.
You don't understand it.
Does that just mean you put all the numbers there, like 10.6.4 says this, or?
That's what they look like, yeah. Section 5, subsection 2, clause 4, right? That's how they refer to these.
So he wrote the first like official law book according to Justinian, right?
Right. And to be clear, it's a legal book is what it really was, right?
Legal book.
So that's what it really is. It was called Corpus Juris Civilis. And civil meaning relating to the citizen under the rule of the authorities. So this is where the word civil comes from. It's basically, for lack of a better expression, it's the rules for the slaves, is what civil means.
So where are you getting this, that civil is related to slave?
Well, it's for the citizens. So these rules don't apply to the emperors and the nobility and the aristocracy.
Oh, it's like but the fact that it doesn't mention the nobility, etc., it's just the rules for the citizens.
Right. So this is what everyone else has to follow, not the emperor and the king and the queen. As I say here in the next bullet, and what they do is they codified statutes for the serfs. These are the rules you have to follow to be a member of this empire. And this goes into the idea that did the Roman Empire really fall? Did it not? A lot of people can argue this back and forth. I'm not don't want to get into any of that, but the introduction of the Catholic system, right? Nicaea and so forth, and whenever that was, 325, and then this corpus juris civilis, right? These statutes for the serfs. The Roman people figured out that the previous 1,000 years or whatever, they were having to go conquest with swords and just kill everybody in a certain area. They don't want to kill everybody, right? Because the value of taking over a people or a land was their production, right? What they could produce. They'd kill the the people that were against them, but then they'd leave the people who didn't resist them, and they'd have to leave behind soldiers and some kind of a mayor, someone to cover the law. But it was hard work to go and do it this way, right? A lot of people got killed. It was the resentment. So they figured out a slicker way to take over nations with religion and statutory law. And this is what they've been doing ever since. Make sense?
And just to clarify, okay, so can you just define the corpus and the juris part? Maybe you said it, but I missed it.
You mean
or translate rather?
Body of law. Corpus.
Okay, so corpus juris means body of law for the citizens.
That's right. That's pretty much it.
Okay. So you're saying that they introduced this law thing, they codified it, and then how does that relate to what you're saying about like controlling people and expanding the empire?
Well, so now there were these 3 books, right, of how you rule the citizens, and it went out to all the outposts and all the regions in Rome and Byzantine and beyond. This is how you control people, basically. We're going to institute these codes.
Oh, okay. Right. So before that, there wasn't really some book of laws that you're looking to.
Right.
To say, oh, you can do this, you can't do this. Like there was just like the 10 Commandments or something.
Well, yeah, they were different in different regions. So there are all these
different in different regions.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
I mean, like the mayor or whatever that ran, this city would just come up with his own stuff because he was the top dog. So no one's allowed to, walk on the main street after 8 p.m. or something, right? That was the rule in City X. And,
so these laws are specifically designed to really control people and really keep people in their place, right?
Right.
Really good laws for an empire.
Right. Keep clamping down on them. It was the security versus freedom thing that Ben Franklin talks about, whatever, 1780 or whatever he said, when you give up your freedom, when you give up freedom for security, you get neither. Right. In the end. So this is the kind of the start of it. Make sense?
Sure.
And one last note about this is where you'll find this dual meaning of the word person start. And this has become very important later on when we talk about this. But there were 2 types of persons, even as far back as Justinian. There was the landowner, the whatever you want to call them, the middle upper class person that owned property and owned land. And then there was the slave. They were literally slaves all through this period, right?
Right.
And they were a different kind of person, even though you call them both persons. It's the biggest trick word there is. And again, I'm not going to cover that in detail here. But here's where it starts. So there's the free person and the not free person in a nutshell.
Right. So does the corpus juris civilis relate to the landowner people?
Yeah, it's making distinctions between the 2.
In that code of laws, inside that stuff, it makes the distinction between the 2 types of persons.
That's right.
Okay.
What type of person am I dealing with here?
And can you actually go get this book and read it?
I believe so, but it was in Latin. Is there a translated version somewhere? I'm sure.
Okay.
So this has been continuously used and updated for the past 1,500 years. Right. That's actually, it's been almost 1,500 years, literally 529 to 2023, coming up on 1,500 years. But yeah, this is what today we have the Uniform Commercial Code, UCC. This is just today's updated version of Corpus Juris Civilis. Make sense?
Yep.
All right. So now I'm going to jump 500 years. And this is continuously being updated and changed. There are different volumes of this. I think he put out 3 in his lifetime, but I may be mistaken about that. But, again, it continuously gets improved upon over time. So
Okay.
the
So
next,
Roman Empire is still existing at this next point you're about to make?
well, yeah, the Byzantine Empire exists all the way up until
1400s or something, right?
I think it's like 1850 or something. They give
Oh,
it
okay, like
life all the way
the
up until,
Ottoman.
yeah.
Okay.
But people argue about it, blah blah blah. So that's not important. But
Okay.
I think the next most important event is William the Conqueror, and you could spend hours talking about a fascinating story about William. But here's the short version: is he decides to go to battle, excuse me, with England, with Britain. By the way, he's from Normandy, which is this region of northern France at this time. So he gets his buddies together, and remarkably, comes over, rows across the English Channel, and does really what the Romans really couldn't ever do. Right? The Romans. It's said that the Romans, Julius Caesar conquered Britain, like in 45 AD or whenever that was, and ruled there for a couple hundred years. But really, they kind of had some like outposts that they ran, but the country outside of the main cities really wasn't under Roman rule. They just had these garrisons, so they never really took it over like William the Conqueror did. And it's a fascinating story. Again, the details aren't important about how it all happened, but somehow or another, these Normans come across and they take the whole island effectively in short order. That's obviously why he's called the Conqueror now, because he conquered England. And this is in 1066 when he's finally coronated. I think it's Christmas when he gets coronated. He's in Westminster, the city of London, as we call it today. And he makes a deal with the Vatican to give them the city of London. So obviously the Vatican must have helped William the Conqueror achieve what he achieved. And this is what
by financing it, or did the Vatican have soldiers, or did they just finance it?
I think it's a little bit of both. Again, this is some not clear stuff, and I don't know all the details. Not that important, but there's always been, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit later, but there's always this competition between the Vatican, the priest and the king, the Pope and the king. It goes all through this time. And they're not really in competition, but they're kind of in competition. So it's almost like a friendly game of chess in a way that these two are playing. They both come out winners after all the serfs slaughter themselves. But this is the running theme we'll hear about again and again as I talk about all this. So anyway, William, this is just an important side note that he makes a deal and basically gives the city of London this 1 square mile, what we call Westminster or City of London today, within the borders of the greater metropolitan area known as London.
And William the Conqueror gave this 1 square mile to the Vatican.
That's right. That was his
in
repayment.
Exchange for the help.
Right. Gotcha. That's his repayment for their assistance in conquering the Brits.
Right.
And what's key in this is that William doesn't want the Normans to have to refight the Brits in 50 or 100 years or whatever. So he does something fascinating and unusual that really has never been done before or since, as far as I'm aware, in that he takes Britain and he slices it up into land tracts and gives dominion over these land tracts to his friends and the generals that helped him win the war.
Right. So this is all barons and nobles owning land and stuff like that.
Right. Earls, right? Barons, lords, dukes, on and on and on. Right.
Okay.
So he creates what we know today as the nobility class on England, and that's why this is why you find so many castles in the British Isles, right? Like what other country are there 100 castles? You're not gonna find them except in the British Isles, of course. Each one of these excuse me, each one of these generals and friends built their own castle. And, he gave them whatever, 100 square miles or 100 acres or whatever it was. He sliced it up. And they were each given sovereignty. That's the key, really, to this whole discussion, is they were each made sovereigns, which had never happened before. The only sovereigns up until this time were the king and the queen and their offspring. So it was always bloodline. Make sense?
Yep.
And they hated to give sovereignty to anybody who wasn't in the bloodline. So that's why they, the children of the kings and queens always married the children of other kings and queens. So they wouldn't.
So why did he do this?
He didn't want to fight half the Normans or the French to have to fight the Brits again. And when a new king rose up 50 or 100 years and retook everything and everybody bowed to the king. So he thought, if I put my Norman French people in as these nobility, then they can't ever rise up again and do what they did. Of course, that didn't work, right? A king arises, about 100 years later, but it was an interesting idea.
So it's a method of controlling the populace, right? Of maintaining power over them.
They didn't want to have to fight the nation again in the future. Really what it comes down to. So again, he creates this nobility class, which is different from the aristocracy class, which is the royal bloodlines of Europe.
Okay.
And what's really interesting, of course, is that now that this nobility class isn't so hung up on this bloodline idea, is that it starts to attract money and talent into Britain like nowhere else. Right? Like, so if you're, you're from a rich family and your daughter wants to become a sovereign, right? She can now become a sovereign by marrying one of these nobles. And likewise, the cleverest, conniving people who know how to take advantage and basically it's all about getting money and getting property now. They too can marry the daughters of, right, these sovereigns. So you can become what no one else could really become throughout the history of Europe. A sovereign.
And could you define a sovereign here?
Someone who is not the statutory legal system does not apply to a sovereign.
Okay.
Make sense?
Yeah. So it's like he upgraded his friends out of this slave ship into sovereignty.
Yeah, which is huge.
Right.
It was not possible.
Yeah, right. That's huge, right? And are you saying even a slave, you're saying a slave could marry into sovereignty?
Right. A serf, a peasant.
A serf.
Right. Yeah. If I had a beautiful daughter that, Lord Sandwich, I guess it's Earl Sandwich, had a son and he was in love with my daughter could become a sovereign. So my grandkids could all then be free and sovereigns.
So he created some sort of hierarchy here as well, right? Like it used to be just like this very, very, very small group at the top, but now there seems to be some sort of nobility hierarchy that you can move up in.
Right. Yeah. Again, only kings and queens are sovereigns to this point. It's the only sovereigns or their kids, right? That was it. Everybody else, you couldn't get in there. You couldn't be a sovereign until this happened.
Okay, gotcha.
It's you can look at it as a way to becoming your free self, which everyone should be by natural law. So again, this attracts money and talent into England like nowhere else. So real quick, this nobility, another word for the nobility was the landed gentry or the peerage. You can call any of these words applies to them. And just a real quick note. So now when let's say somebody in the nobility class kills a serf for whatever reason, right? Or steals something from a serf, whatever it is, when they go to trial, they get a jury of their peers. So when they are put on trial by the serf, right, they get to have their other nobles as their jury. They don't have to have the serfs in the jury box. And you can apply that today, right? If you were, let's say you were an electrician, for example, you don't want, and you get into a dispute with a doctor or something like that, right? You can get all of the jury. If your things were right, you could have only, skilled tradesmen as your jury, right? Those are your peers.
Right.
Not a jury full of doctors who are going to be sympathetic to the doctor.
Right. Like before the trial, you have that session where the lawyers on each side are trying to get people sympathetic to each case on the jury, right?
Yeah, but in the real case, there is no pre-trial jury selection stuff. I need someone who these are the rules. I get a jury of my peers, so I only want electricians and plumbers and carpenters and general contractors or whatever. I can say these are my peers. So the only people that can be on the jury are these. Today, it's all the legal system. It's all jumbled up.
Okay.
There's no attorneys
Right. So
at this point.
it was introduced this thing where you almost had the right to request that it's only your peers, but it only applies to the nobility.
Right. You didn't almost have the right. They had the right. So they would never be judged by the peons, the serfs, the peasants.
Right. Now the serfs, who did they have on their jury? Did they even have a jury?
Oh yeah, this is where we get into this chancery idea, but yeah, no, this is where the legal system. Remember, the legal system applies to the serf, so a single judge can decide you're innocent or guilty.
Right. Okay, so the serfs were just like the judge decides whether you're innocent or guilty. The nobility gets this nice jury of peers and trial by jury system, right?
Well, so yeah, trial by jury is the right way to say it today. That's right. The jury trial is what the serfs get. So it just changes. This is an example of just changing the words around a little bit. It means a whole different thing. So if you got to this point and you did all your status correction and got yourself in the position where you could become of the nobility class, right, above the legal system, and you were in a court case, a suit of some sort, and you say I want a trial by jury, and the judge said, "We'll give you a jury trial." That's different. That's the legal thing. You say, "No, I want the common law thing, the trial by jury." Just a little twist of the words, and this is the whole kit and caboodle. He's got jurisdiction over you now instead of you having jurisdiction over him. But that's a whole big discussion. We're not going to do that one right now.
Mm-hmm.
So I love this word jurisdiction. It's a super powerful word, and you hear it thrown around today, like in so many incorrect ways. But it's just become the way people talk about it today. Jurisdiction. Oh, you're in the state jurisdiction. You're in the federal jurisdiction. You're in the municipal jurisdiction. You're in the appeals jurisdiction. You're in the district courts. And it's on and on and on. All of those ideas are really what the right correct word for all of those is venues. It's really the correct word. The word jurisdiction, if you break it down, right? Diction. We all know what diction is, right? The spoken word.
So we got law speak here, right? Jurisdiction is law speak.
I really call it oath. I call it spoken oath. I like this better because back in the days, right? So now we've got these nobilities, right? This nobility class, and that we've got this England sliced up all over the place. And there's no pens and parchment hardly at all for everybody here. So what would happen would be let's say, you're married and you have 2 kids and you want to live on, Lord Munchausen's land. He needs, people to work his land. He needs to generate revenue, right? He's basically all of these nobility generate revenue through renting out their land for people to work it.
Mm-hmm.
So what you would do was you would swear an oath to Lord Munchausen, and in front of witnesses that I now will follow the rules on the Munchausen estate.
Mm-hmm.
And that was your jurisdiction. So if you got into a tussle with Lord Sandwich's rules over across the estate and another piece, you would say, no, I'm under Lord Munchausen, not Lord Sandwich. And there would be little scuffles here and there. But this is the idea where you said an oath. I will, and you were, by swearing that oath, you were agreed that if they got into a battle or the king needed knights and fighters, is that you would protect Lord Munchausen. That was part of your oath. And then he'd give you whatever 10 acres to harvest, farm something and you can build a house there and live there and improve the land and so on and so forth. So that was how this system was working in England. Make sense?
Okay.
So
Yes.
I would say my oath to Lord Munchausen.
Right. So pretty much every serf in England is under an oath to some particular lord, then most likely, yeah.
Right. Previously, they were just they were under oath to the king. Just if you were born there, it was just automatic. But now we have these oaths to. This is where the knights come in, the knight errants, right? The whole, kind of romantic period of time. Right? There were these different knights from different lords, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that'll go way off track. So let's jump to the Magna Carta, which is 1215. So a lot of people don't understand this. It's really important to understand that most people think if you go, if you take a class, in high school or college, you're going to hear about how the Magna Carta was the precursor to the Constitution. And, this was the amazing thing that Britain did for their people, and on and on and on and on. But as it turns out, most of that is not true. The Magna Carta, it's an amazing document, don't get me wrong, but it was for these nobility class, these lords only. It wasn't for the serfs and the peons.
Mm-hmm.
And really what happened was that, a king had arisen again, and, the royalty had come back in and taken dominion, but they didn't take away the sovereignty of this nobility class. That's what the one thing they didn't do. They just kind of took over running, the serfdom again, who weren't, sworn to lords and so forth. And it was just, as always, encroaching on the barons, the earls, the dukes, the lords, etc. So, a lot of these barons were Knights Templar, the Templar barons, were the nobility, and they didn't like what was happening. So they basically, at sword point, forced King John to sign this Magna Carta. Sign it or you're dead, basically. And of course, basically the whole idea of it is that the king couldn't encroach upon these natural common law rights that the nobility class had come to accept as the way things were after William the Conqueror. Does that make sense?
Sure. So if I can just clarify what you said, just to make sure I had it right. So you mentioned common law again, right?
Right.
So the nobility, since William the Conqueror had kind of like established a bit of a common law, right? Like they've been doing things a certain way. And then I guess King John got a bit of a power trip going on, and he started to try to put his own laws on, against their common law.
Yeah.
He tried to put statutes in to, to counter their common law. And they didn't like that because they had common law, what they'd commonly done. And then they had a whole biff, and then they made the Magna Carta.
That's right. All right. And they made him sign it.
Okay.
So basically that just meant leave us alone. We're not serfs. That was really what it was. Right. You can't step on us like you step on the serfs.
Okay.
And just a last little interesting note was that I think I mentioned earlier, this ecclesiastical canon law, right, from the Vatican Romans. He was the last king of England to really operate under that.
Mm-hmm.
It's a big topic to get into, but that's just important that this common law now becomes it becomes a lasting thing in England, and we will have this little battle between this English common law and this Roman civil law, as we call it today, statutory law. All this continuous push and pull going on between them forevermore.
Okay.
So we jump to 1291. This is the Temple of Solomon, the Knights Templar, the Solomon Templars. They get established in Switzerland, and during this time, kind of 1200 to 1300, this idea of the Chancery Court is established, the chancel as it's called, and it's the Chancel Temple. We call it the Crown Inner Temple today. This is started, and today is called equity. It's a fascinating jurisdiction of law, if you will, this idea of equity. We're not going to go into it today, but this is something different from common law. And it's effectively a separate jurisdiction.
Okay.
And it's very hard to access today, but people argue about who can access, if it's even around. If it's not, we'll get into that a little bit later on. It's interesting arguments about whether this is something that you can get to today. And a lot of people think you can. Anyway, this is done in Switzerland, and then in City of London, we have what's known as the Crown Temple Bar. And I should make a point that the crown does not mean the king or the queen. The crown is really the bankers. That's really what it is. It's a corporate entity, even though corporations haven't been created yet. It's really what this is. It's separate from the king and the queen, and these become the people who really run the show.
So when did they? Is it just now in the history that the bankers are kind of coming in, or were they there before in England?
Well, they've always been there, since the Medici
Right,
and the Babylonian banking magic and everything. We could go off on an incredible tangent there, but they're the ones that are financing. They want to be behind the scenes. They don't want to be out front. So this is the generational wealth building up, and they don't want to be seen. So they're happy to be behind the scenes. And this is kind of them starting to take over in this period.
Okay.
So they're basically
they're making
letting
some emergence. They've gained power over the centuries, and they seem to be making some emergence. That's what you're introducing, right?
They've got all the money. The kings and queens are borrowing money from them, so that they're in hock. It also has to do with usury. Again, don't have time. I mean, that's a whole separate conversation. But they are now as they are today, right? They are the behind the scenes, the real power.
Right. Okay.
Because they're controlling the money more than anything else. So this is the initiation of what we now know today as the legal system, or the liege lord system, right? Liege lord, kind of like a landlord, right? This is the nobility, is the liege that owns all the land. He's your lord. You swear your jurisdiction, your spoken oath to this lord. And this is where this word legal derives from. I think you and I have discussed that before.
Right.
So
I guess what I'm interested in here is like you're saying something's happening, and it's like a bit, it just feels a bit like I guess these entities like Crown Temple Bar, Inns of Court. I'm kind of like, well, someone's doing something, making a legal system, but like I'm missing some detail here.
Well, it's already made, right? The corpus juris civilis is the basis of the legal system, the Roman civil law.
Okay.
Yes?
Yes.
They're just using that. They're bringing that back into play again and again to overlay against the common law and trick people into thinking they're under it instead of the common law.
Oh, okay. And when you say people here, are you talking about the nobility?
Yeah.
Right. So there was the Magna Carta, and then then the nobility was like, okay, yeah, we're sovereign. Cool, cool, cool. And then they were cruising along on that, right? So getting in the momentum of their manifestation, and then the bankers suddenly kind of like emerged as very powerful and started to put some code upon the nobility again. Is that
right?
What's happening?
So yeah, let me see if this helps. All through this period, let's just call it a 300-year period, the serfs swore their oath to the lords, to the earls, to the barons.
Right.
This legal system coming in, right, is taking that away from them, so that the serfs and peasants swear to the king or the bankers. Right. So they're losing their peasants and serfs to the king. Make sense?
Yeah, sure. Do you know who was the king at this time?
No, I don't keep track of it, but this is it's not important. I don't think it's happening slowly. This is a boil the frog scenario. It doesn't happen all at once. None of this stuff does, right? It's over
So
time.
the serfs, they're getting kind of like allured to the legal system, and they're like, you know what, I'm like aligned with this sovereign, but you know what, this legal system seems really good to me or something.
No,
Do
no,
you think
no,
it's kind of
no,
like that?
no, 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 no. It wasn't. The choice is never of the serfs. This
Okay,
is
all right.
a battle between the
Give
kings and
Gave way
and
too
the
much
nobility.
independence to them then.
Yeah,
Okay, so it's a power battle. Okay, so the king specifically is like exerting more power and like just literally taking over control of the serfs from the nobility, right?
that's right. That's a lot better way
Okay.
of looking at it.
And now was the nobility though? Were they like controlling the serfs? They were doing it just as bad, right? But they were like a bigger group rather than just one
Not
person. Is
well.
that it?
I wouldn't say just as bad, but you swore your oath to your lord, your
Right.
jurisdiction. So
Okay.
you had to follow his rules.
Okay.
Right. That's like a corporate policy we talked about earlier. This is the bylaw. If you live
Right. So you
on
went to work for them, right?
right, if you live on the Lord Munchausen estate, you have to follow his rules.
Mm-hmm.
Simple as that.
Okay. So
Right.
now the king and with the bankers behind him comes more into power, right?
That's constantly happening. Yes.
Right, right.
You always need to bubble power to the small select class. And it's always what's been happening since time immemorial. Fewer and fewer people or corporations or kings in control. They want to get it to where 500, 1,000 guys run everything, more or
Mm,
less. You get the idea, right?
sure.
So we're always fighting that, right? We're fighting that right now in this very day.
Right, right, right. There seems to be one like the power is kind of like being taken up to the top, or it's like spreading out evenly, right? It's like those two
Right.
forces kind of happening, right?
That's right. Those forces are what take away our power little by. We give our power to them. It's a constant thing. If they let us have our power, then we live in a different world.
Mm-hmm.
This is the blind trust and authority situation we talked about last week.
Right.
Making sense?
Yep.
All right, good questions. So, the next big moment that's interesting is this is where we're bringing the Pope back in here, is this papal bull known as Unum Sanctum, which means the one holy, or the one holy church. And really, this is how these papal bulls work. We're not going to dive into crazy details of them, but in essence, what it said is, if you're not under our church, right, the Catholic Church,
What is a bull? I think
just
we need to establish
that a pope's decree, an
a pope's decree.
official ecclesiastical law.
Okay.
The Pope says whatever it says, and that's the new ecclesiastical law for everybody underneath the rule of the Pope, Vatican.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yep.
And really, what it just says is, really what he's saying is everybody. We have to get everybody under the church, because without the Catholic Church, the Vatican, there's no salvation for you in the afterlife.
Oh no.
So by decree, saying everybody has to come under the Catholic Church. And this is the classic battle we have, the priest versus the king, Pope versus the king and queen. This is just an example of how they're always going back and forth.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a big deal, because now we have all these people who think we've got to conquer all these different countries and tribes and lands because we're trying to save them, right? This is what they now believe. We don't want to harm you. We want you to be saved in the afterlife. The only way to do that is to be under the rule of the Vatican. Make sense?
You're saying, like, which people are you saying are believing that we need to do this to save you? Just the head of the Vatican, or like everyone who believes in
Everybody who's
everyone
a
who's a
Catholic.
part of the Vatican, everyone who's a Catholic, right?
Yeah. So they'll go
Okay.
fight for the Pope. Right. This is their
Right.
this is their reason for running off into other lands and, you know, wiping out civilizations and crusades and inquisitions and on and on and on, right? They have a
Yeah.
they have a legitimate reason for it. They think these people are ignorant and they can't be saved, right, without the Catholic
Right. So
system.
this is for your own good bunch.
Exactly, which is what we saw just happen in the last 3 years with all the COVID stuff, right? Is for your own good, for the good of everybody.
Okay.
This is the trick they always use.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe it's lost on people, but you know, the Pope was the absolute ruler of tens of millions of people. He was the God, right? He was the vicar. You know, he was the direct connection to God. So whatever he said, that was the truth. Yes.
Yeah, and we have to remember that he still owns the city of London, right?
Yeah, we didn't mention that today, but yeah, that's right. That's always
And
been.
in this time, when the bull was decreed, he's owning the city of London.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's where the legal system comes out of. That's where it is, and the banking system, which we'll get into here. Maybe not today. Looks like we're coming up on an hour, but we'll get into it in the next session.
Mm-hmm.
So, jumping forward again up to 1493, we have this inter cetera, which is this other, or Caetera, however you want to say it, Caetara, another papal bull by Pope Alexander VI. And this is otherwise known as the Doctrine of Discovery. And this was power is already granted to the Portuguese, who were one of the first to really go out and, you know, sail across the Atlantic and conquer lands in South America, North America, and so forth. This is now granted to Spain. And it's this Doctrine of Discovery that says wherever, and of course the Pope is financing these, you know, voyages, any newly discovered land is property of the Pope and Vatican. Or it doesn't matter that people have been living there for thousands of years, right? Whatever civilizations are there, by this decree, this is not all this land and the people now come under the Pope.
So Portugal and Spain were at this time under the control of the Vatican?
Yes, everywhere was, right? But well, really the only place that we have in Europe fighting that's pushing against this is England. But yeah, that's right.
Oh, okay. Right.
So it's just fascinating that these two, you know, there's hundreds of papal bulls, but these are the two most interesting ones for our discussion here, right? Is this, if you don't come under the church, you can't be saved. And so we want to go out and save as many people as we can, right? Wouldn't you want to do that?
Mm-hmm.
You'd fight for that.
Oh, definitely. I mean, it's gotta fight for my brothers.
Right. And they aren't even your brothers. They're the people in the, you know, ABC tribe in the country next door, right? But you know, you're meant to feel like they're your brothers, even though they don't think you're your brother because you're coming in and slaughtering, you know, their warriors and everything. But yeah, that was the impetus to go do this. Ultimately,
Okay.
I'm going to kill all these people so that I can save this handful via the Catholic Church. So we have to save everybody. And oh, by the way, everywhere we set foot on is now property of the Vatican.
Well, I guess just one clarification. Do you think at the highest levels of the Catholic Church, they actually believed this nonsense in saving people for their own good? Or were they just a fake thing for power?
Not at the very highest levels, no. But I mean,
Good.
certainly,
Okay.
You know, step down a notch or two. I can't specifically say it was the cardinal or the vice cardinal, but you know, a certain number of them were in on it, but not, you know, not the vast majority. Of course not. So I think we'll do this section and then we'll call it for today, and then we'll complete this hopefully in the next broadcast. But so what happens during this whole period, right? It's called the Age of Exploration or the Age of Discovery, and it's kind of the early 1400s to the late 1600s, and this is of course when, you know, America's United States is founded, and you know, well, I mean the British have landed and the Spanish have landed in all these different places, and they've begun basically spreading their imperial empires during this whole period, and they're claiming land for kings and as well as the liege lord's children. This is an important idea, is that England is already cut up, sliced up. So they're, you know, of course, all these lords are having sons that they don't have any they can't get any new land in England. It's already all spoken for. The only way they can get their own estates is to go to other countries, other continents, and start their own thing, their own fiefdom, if you will. All right, so this is a big
Thievedom,
impetus.
did you say?
Fiefdom?
Oh, fiefdom.
Right. So they're
What
claiming
is
land.
fiefdom?
Yeah, their little kingdom, right? That little tract of whatever, 100 acres or whatever,
Okay.
that's under
Right.
Lord
I see
Munchausen.
on Webster, fief, a fee, a feud, an estate held of a superior on condition of military service. Okay. So
There
some
you
sort of
go.
estate.
Yeah. Right. So I set up my estate. I let people come and build houses and work the land, and they promise that they'll go and fight wars for me if I need them.
Right.
Just like that. So right now, what we really have is people paying for ships and voyages from all of these different entities. Now we have it happening from the Pope, Vatican. We have it coming from the kings, and we have it coming from the lords. They're all trying to do this.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's a good place to call it here for today. So great
Right. Because
questions.
next session will be in the New World.
Yeah, that's it. Exactly. So we will jump into the New World, and we'll wrap it up here today. So thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you all next week.
Indeed. I mean, even though we're gonna, continue this part, like while you're here, if you're just listening to this one at the moment, I mean, take a look around the website, take a look at our trainings if you want to take yourself further in life. Much enjoyment and empowerment to you.